In this video, I'm going to talk about line twists and specifically what to do if you encounter them, some strategies to get out of them, and some important concepts that you need to know to manage them effectively. These are all things that I have learned the hard way through experience over the years, so my hope is by watching this video, you won't have to learn it the hard way like I did. To start off, I want to introduce a technique that is suitable for really anyone that is generally comfortable with Backfly. You don't need to be an ace at it, but you do want to at least be comfortable with Backfly and have embraced the idea that Backfly is a stable and safe place to be, because you're going to have to hang out there for a bit. So as soon as you start to twist up and you realize that it's inevitable, the most important thing to know is that you can't let the glider enter any kind of turn, especially not a spiral or an auto rotation. This is because, very similar to reverse kiting, it's very disorienting to be twisted, and it's very easy to unintentionally add the opposite input that you wanted to do. So you may try to steer the glider back to straight flight, and you actually end up putting it into a spiral. So things can get out of hand very, very quickly. That's why it's critical that you not let the glider fly into any kind of turn or spiral at all costs, even if that means balling the glider up into a stall. Now, most of the time when you get twisted is you already are in spin of some kind or some kind of stalled flight, and usually either the spin stopped very abruptly and your body kept going, or you just recovered and the glider shot forward. There are a few exceptions where it's possible the glider can twist up and then it starts flying before you get a chance. So if you're lucky enough for the glider to be in straight and level flight and you're twisted, then you don't need to do this. But if you're in some kind of stalled flight and then you have a risk of a uncontrolled exit, or if it's unstable at all, or there's a potential for the glider starting to wind up, the first thing you want to do is put it in Backfly and then be as symmetric as possible, meaning your weight shift is neutral, so the risers are even, your hands are symmetric and even, and this symmetry is going to help ensure that the glider doesn't want to wind up anymore. There is sort of a sweet spot on where to be in your Backfly. If you're too deep, then the wingtip lines will not have tension in them, and you need that tension to help pull the risers apart. If you're in a really, really deep Backfly, then you're not going to have much force pulling the risers apart, and you're just going to sort of stay twisted. So you want to have a good amount of the glider open to give you a chance to untwist spontaneously. But conversely, just like in a normal Backfly, if you go too high, there's a chance for the glider to restart spontaneously before you want it to, and then you're in trouble because you're twisted and the glider's flying forward, and then you'd have to restall it again. So you want to be as high as you can get away with without risking the glider restarting, so there's a nice middle ground there. If you're lucky, the glider will untwist while you're in Backfly, but there's a chance that it'll be kind of stable and you need to help it. So you need to identify which side has to be spun out, and if you lost track of it or you're not sure, whichever riser is in front, that is furthest away from your face, that's the side that needs to spin out. So you brake a little bit more on that side, brake a little bit less on the other, and then let the glider spin its way out of the line twists. And then there's a slightly more advanced technique, which is better if you have good reaction time and your situational awareness and perception are just a little sharper, because you identify where the glider is going right away and then immediately go straight to spinning it out, and you kind of skip that Backfly stage, and you also are letting one side fly completely so that it can spin out faster and more effectively, but you have to have a little bit better control because there's a slightly greater risk of the glider starting to fly entirely if you don't do a good job of keeping the negative side stalled the whole time. So the first thing to do is identify which side you're going to have to spin to exit. And it is not important whether it's the glider that's spinning or your body that's spinning. The only thing you need to know is how the glider is moving relative to your point of view. So in this case, the glider is going to be, the right wingtip is going to be moving forward from my perspective. The left's going to be moving backwards. So the glider's going to be, as far as I'm concerned, spinning clockwise, which means that I'm going to have to undo that action by spinning it counterclockwise, meaning I'm going to have to spin the right side and make the left side move forward to go back the opposite direction. So you can see that right side starting to spin up. And as soon as you know which way you're going to have to go, which often is the same side as the maneuver that you were just doing, you're going to put the outside hand all the way up, just like in helicopter, so that it can fly and have the best chance to untwist. And then you're going to put your negative side hand down to the backfly position. And it's better to err on the side of putting that negative hand a little too deep, because you're going to have all these oscillations and pendulums in this unstable, chaotic spin. And if you go too high, there's a risk of the glider spontaneously restarting and shooting, which you don't want it to do. You need it to stay in a spin. Now, the downside of being too deep on the negative is, just like in a helicopter, it's going to collapse that wingtip and it's going to make it not fly, which can either delay or even stop the process of spinning the twists out. So you need to begin to raise that negative hand up towards the heli position. And I say towards the heli position, not to the heli position, because we're not going for a perfect helicopter. We just need to open it up enough that it starts to spin. And if you go too high, then there's the possibility of the glider, like before, restarting when you don't want to. So it's better to err on the side of being a little too deep and not being too greedy. Don't forget, because of the line twists, you're going to have more friction in the brake, which means that there may be a slightly delayed reaction and it'll have a different feeling. So what you're going to look for is seeing this wingtip start to open up and going just high enough that the glider begins to spin the twists out. So you just slowly raise it more and more and more, watching the glider, waiting for the moment where the twists begin to undo. Once you get to that point, don't overpilot the glider. If you go too high and you let the glider restart and start flying while you're twisted, you waste all your work. You're going to have to stall it again. And if you pull down too much, you might collapse that wingtip more and then stop the spin, and then you're back to where you started. So if you're lucky enough to get to the point where it's untwisting, you're almost all the way there. Just stay still, be patient, allow the process to unfold. And it may take a little bit if you have multiple twists, but just trust in the process. And then once you're untwisted, you know what to do. And if you get really good at this, you can even interrupt twists in the process of seeing it start to shoot and block it right away. There's also another recovery technique where you can fly or return back to forward flight while you still have line twists, but I think it's more of an advanced move, and it is a bit risky because of the potential to lose control. In this case, I have a twisted cravat that is already starting to auto-rotate, so the first thing I am trying to do is spin that side out and make sure that it doesn't auto-rotate, so I break it into backfly and get into a stable, symmetric backfly. From my experience being twisted, I know that I only have 1 1/4 twist, so I know I have decent control and I have a chance to return to forward flight. And the reason I'm doing it in this scenario is I don't have a lot of altitude to troubleshoot trying to spin the glider out. And I know that this recovery into forward flight will consume less altitude and get me untwisted faster. I'm just risking entering a turn, so I know that I have to be very diligent about being symmetric with my weight shift and being symmetric with my hands as I do the exit with 1 full twist. The advantage of exiting from twists from forward flight is the pressure in the glider adds extra tension to these lines on the wingtip, which pulls the risers apart, so you untwist more effectively. And of course, you're not losing altitude at a higher rate like you are in a backfly, but your sensitivity with the weight shift and asymmetry in the brake is going to be higher. So you have to be very, very careful about staying still with the body and making sure you don't enter a turn. And then the last major topic I want to talk about is reaching above the twist. My recommendation is don't do this if you're in any kind of stalled configuration because of the possibility of a unexpected and uncontrolled restart. Even if you have a lot of twists and it feels like the brakes are locked, it's possible for the brakes to get pulled up when you least expect it. So if you drop the brakes or even if you raise your hands while you're holding onto them, the glider may shoot on you at a very inopportune time, like it does here, and you risk all sorts of nasty things happening. The only time I would recommend reaching above the twists is if you are in forward flight, and then you don't have to worry about the glider shooting. In my experience, a lot of the time, the twists are so high that you can't reach those lines anyway. If you're in forward flight, you're certainly welcome to try. If you have a lot of tension in the brakes, it may be difficult to control. So reaching above the lines can be a nice idea to stop a spiral if you don't have good control of the brakes. But for me personally, if it's starting to wind up and I feel like I need control, I would prefer just to stall the glider and use one of those two techniques. And lastly, these techniques are not guaranteed to work. They definitely are very helpful, and I have escaped a lot of twists doing them, but if you're not high enough to go through the whole process or you have a ton of twists and a lot of friction, there's no guarantee that you're going to escape. So if it's time to throw your reserve, it's very important that you put both brakes into one hand and then leave that hand kind of chest level so that you stay in backfly. It doesn't need to be a clean backfly. If it's rotating around, that's okay. What's most important is that the glider doesn't get a chance to fly, and where it could go into an auto rotation. That way it stays above you and remains a much more favorable position to deploy your reserve from. So I hope that helps you guys out, that ideally you don't get twisted at all, but if you do, you manage to escape them. And if you guys want to learn more, I do teach SAV and Acro courses out of Turkey every spring and fall, and you can reach out to me at my website, beyondsav.com, or on Instagram @goodnessgravity. See you next time.